Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Thanks for being with us. It's November 15th tonight. We're taping a show a few weeks in advance. And we've got an interesting program tonight. We're going to be talking about issues associated with Mississippi River and navigation along the Mississippi River. Our guest is Jennifer Hensley. Jennifer is the Iowa Conservation Organizer for the Midwest Regional Office of Sierra Club. Welcome to Iowa News and Views.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here. We're going to see about a 17-minute video here in a few minutes. What's the focus of the program?
The focus is on the Mississippi River and kind of a historical perspective of what the lock and dam system has done to the river, and it talks some about the push to expand commercial navigation and expand the locks on the river.
Okay, the backdrop is the Corps of Engineers is doing a study on whether we ought to double the size of the locks.
Right. Right now there's a large group of people saying we need to expand navigation, and that cost is coming at about $1.2 billion. So Congress has authorized the Corps to do a $51 million study talking about to research what's going on the river and what the impacts of expanding navigation would have on the river.
Okay, so this the program we're going to see is pictures that have been sent from various people that are put together.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of local people have contributed slides and things like that, and it's been put into a film format.
Very good. This is a brewing political issue, not only here in Iowa, but in the upper Midwest.
Right. There's, like I said, there's a large push, and it's largely agribusiness, because from the Sierra Club's perspective and several other environmental groups' perspective, expanding navigation only benefits agribusiness, and it really doesn't help benefit the small farmers.
Okay.
So we've had a lot of, agribusiness has been flying in the face of environmentalists for a while, and so there's been this kind of fundamental clash.
Very good. Why don't we get ready to roll that, Nathan, and we'll take a look at it. We'll be back in a few minutes to kind of give some analysis of what we've seen, but I think you'll enjoy this.
The Mississippi, America's river, an icon of our past, the fur trade, even before nationhood, the era of the great riverboat paddle wheelers, Huck Finn and Mark Twain, and the imprint the Native Americans left on the land at Effigy Mound National Monument. But what of the Mississippi today? Today, the great river is more important to all of us than ever before. It is a major commercial artery delivering the grain harvest of the heartland to market for export. It provides a waterfront setting for many of our greatest cities and our most charming hamlets. Millions depend on it for the pure water essential to life. Millions more turn to it for the breadth of its wide open spaces, which create a sense of escape and self-renewal. And millions rely on it for recreation of 100 kinds. The Mississippi is also an environmental cornucopia, an enormous and complex ecosystem which provides habitat for hundreds of species of fish, birds, animals, and plants, the flora and fauna of our natural heritage. Today, on the threshold of the new millennium, it is remarkable that the Mississippi can mean so much to so many. This is more the result of good luck than good planning. The river is truly vast, and with sound stewardship, it can continue to provide for us all. But if this delicate balance of environmental and economic benefits is to be our legacy to the generations to come, we must exercise, indeed impose, a much more thoughtful and informed guardianship upon the river than we have done in the past. This program is about the upper Mississippi, that portion which flows from the headwaters in northern Minnesota to the point where it joins its great tributary, the Ohio. 10,000 years ago, great glacial sheets covered much of North America. When they melted, massive torrents of water carved out today's Mississippi River Valley and those of many of its tributaries, and buried the valley bottoms in deep deposits of sand, gravel, and dirt. The Mississippi that emerged was a dynamic, ever-changing river for thousands of years. As each spring's floodwaters cut new channels, the river's main current changed constantly, weaving from bluff to bluff, while the old channels became quiet backwaters. This ebb and flow, new channels, new backwaters, was a ceaseless process of renewal and led to the upper Mississippi becoming one of the world's great examples of what scientists term a large floodplain river. From high ground to high ground, the floodplain breadth extended several miles. A complex tapestry of open river, backwater lakes, marshes, seasonally flooded lowlands, and forested islands and uplands. Plant communities rich in diversity adapted to these conditions, and these in turn came to support a wide variety of animal life. As an ecological showcase, the upper Mississippi became nature's great laboratory. At first, human encroachment did not greatly alter this rich tapestry. Native Americans, and later European fur traders, lived gently on the land. But by the late 19th century, man's impact had become substantial. The great northern forests were clear-cut and sent down the river, and the prairies were plowed for farming. Millions of tons of topsoil washed off the land and into the Gulf of Mexico. Cities and industries came to fill the floodplain, and farmers walled off the river with levees. Severe water pollution followed inevitably, with massive loss of wildlife habitat. But the most far-reaching change was that the river was altered for navigation. At first, this was simply a program to remove snags so the great riverboats could move unimpeded. But the nature and scope of waterborne commerce grew apace, and Congress authorized more and more extreme measures to maintain an ever deeper channel. In 1930, Congress established the existing system, a navigable channel 9 feet deep. To maintain such a channel demanded enormous modification. Over 24 dams were built from the Twin Cities to St. Louis, and another 7 on the Illinois River. Each dam has a lock by which the water level may be raised or lowered. This enables huge rafts of barges pushed by towboats to move up and down river. Thus, the river has come to resemble a staircase whose risers are the dams, with the reach of river between dams termed pools, the treads. The dams drastically altered the river's natural structure. Above each dam is a broad, shallow lake. Upstream from the lake, we find a reach of flooded sloughs, marshes, and backwater ponds. And still further upstream is a stretch that is above the dam's high water mark, where the profile of the river floodplain is little altered from its original state. At first, after the locks and dams were built, it seemed as if all uses of the upper Mississippi would prosper. Stimulated by the huge government subsidy, barge traffic grew exponentially. Yet there remained plenty of room for an expanding urban population to use the river for recreation. Further, the new impoundments actually created an increase in wildlife habitat. But that increase was only temporary. We now understand that the locks and dams and the dikes have greatly reduced the river's ability to renew itself. The annual regeneration that had been the life force of the river since the retreat of the glaciers can no longer take place as before. Erosion and sedimentation have replaced renewal, so that the river is less able every year to sustain its diversity and multiple uses. Spring Lake, Wisconsin, for example. In 1939, Spring Lake was a complex ecosystem of channels and islands with a great variety of aquatic and terrestrial vegetation. But by the 1960s, the islands were eroding away. And by the 1980s, they were nearly gone. Hidden is the corresponding loss of underwater features. Today, the lake is an open, shallow, silt-ridden expanse with little natural or recreational value. Such loss of habitat and biodiversity is occurring many places on the river, and scientists are concerned that time is running out. The Illinois River provides a sobering example of what can happen when environmentally degrading forces are given free rein for too long. In 1908, the Illinois provided 10% of the nation's commercial freshwater fish harvest. Through pollution, sedimentation, and loss of floodplain, that figure had plummeted to 0.3% by 1980. There are ambitious plans to restore the Illinois, but the job will be difficult and expensive. In nature, as in medicine, prevention is easier, less expensive, and less traumatic than is cure. It is hard to restore a collapsed ecosystem. Today, in spite of an increasing number of degraded areas, the upper Mississippi still is capable of maintaining remarkable biodiversity. The river supports a remarkable 485 species of birds, mammals, fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mussels. Although fully 50 of these are listed by state agencies as rare, threatened, or endangered. Moreover, the river continues to provide spring and fall habitat for 40% of North America's migrating shorebirds and waterfowl, one of the world's great flyways. In 1924, on its northern reaches, Congress established the Upper Mississippi River Wildlife and Fish Refuge. Stretching 260 miles, this refuge has preserved floodplain habitat in its natural condition, a necessity for many species of fish. It is an area of great scenic beauty, a magnet for recreational users from throughout the world. Today, more people visit this refuge than Yellowstone National Park. Further south, the river's health is more compromised. Here, most floodplains were walled off from the river by agricultural levees. Yet even here, aquatic habitat in backwater margins remains sufficient to establish wildlife refuges. Yes, even now, 60 years after the navigation dams were built, the Upper Mississippi remains a globally significant environmental resource. With proper management, we can still pass on this treasure to our children and grandchildren. Sad to say, however, a management philosophy devoid of balance and common sense now threatens the river's future. A proposal is afoot to double the barge traffic on the Upper Mississippi. This means twice the tows, twice the hazard for recreational boaters, and twice the demand to convert natural floodplains to industrial facility sites. Every barge tow creates a huge wake that churns up sediment and causes erosion, stressing fish, mussels, and aquatic plants that are already struggling to survive. Twice the traffic may doom many of these populations. And of course, a doubling of traffic will mean twice as many trucks rumbling through our communities, going to and from the huge terminals, causing pollution, noise, and congestion. Even as every natural indicator shouts for a more balanced approach to maintain the river's health, the barge industry and its dam and lock building allies in the Corps of Engineers seem dedicated to transforming the river into a one-dimensional resource dedicated solely to barge commerce. Advocates of this plan argue that economic benefits will outweigh the environmental costs. But is that true? Who benefits and who pays? Some of the largest and most profitable corporations in the U.S. reap the benefits, but those benefits are not passed on to American consumers, since most of the river's barge traffic is carrying grain for export. We are placing in jeopardy one of our greatest natural treasures in order that foreign consumers, mainly in China and the Pacific Rim, can pay a little less for the grain they import. And who pays? Mainly you and I, as taxpayers. The waterway industry is the most heavily subsidized form of transportation in the U.S., according to the Congressional Budget Office. Over 85% of the construction and operating costs of the so-called improvements comes from your pockets and mine. By contrast, the existing railroad network can easily carry all forecasted increases in export grain, without subsidies and without raising rates. Who benefits? Who pays? And who loses? As the river is transformed from a scenic and biologically vital watercourse into a sterile, barren ditch, American families lose the joys of boating, hunting, fishing, and picnicking. Local communities lose too, for their economic health depends on a $1.2 billion river-based recreation industry and its 18,000 jobs. Herons and eagles and deer lose, and all the hundreds of other wildlife species, as the diverse habitats which sustain them are lost. And all of us who pay taxes lose, as our pockets are picked to increase yet again an already huge government subsidy. The Mississippi belongs to us all. It is our heritage, which we must protect for our families and for our future. Mark Twain knew this. His, more than any other, is the voice of America's great river.
I had lost something which could never be restored. All the grace, the beauty, the poetry had gone out of the majestic river. I still kept in mind a certain wonderful sunset which I witnessed when steamboating was new to me. A broad expanse of the river was turned to blood. There were graceful curves, reflected images, woody heights, soft distances. I stood like one bewitched. I drank it in a speechless rapture. But as I have said, a day came when I began to cease from noting the glories and the charms which the moon and the sun and the twilight wrought upon the river's face. No, the romance and beauty were all gone from the river. All the value any feature of it had for me now was the amount of usefulness it could furnish toward the safe piloting of a steamboat.
For more than 100 years, every decision about the fate of the river has benefited navigation. It's time we consider the needs of the river for its natural values, not just navigation. We can have a healthy river again if people demand it. You can make a difference. To find out how, contact the Sierra Club.
We're back. We're talking about navigation issues on the Mississippi River. We've just watched a videotape produced by the Midwest Regional Office of the Sierra Club as the credits indicated, and I'd like to thank Bill Redding for getting us a copy of that tape. We appreciate that. Our guest this evening is Jennifer Hensley. She's the conservation organizer for Iowa for the Sierra Club Regional Office out of Madison. Thanks again for being here. Interesting presentation. Who benefits? Who pays? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think the point that we make over and over is that this is not going to benefit the small farmer in Iowa. This is not going to benefit the small farmer in Illinois. This is going to benefit the Cargills, the ADM, the ConAgras, and the Citibank, which is part of Citicorp, which own the largest part of the barge industry. And this is who it's really going to help. It's going to subsidize their activities further. And so it's not going to be a benefit for our farmers. And I think we need to really evaluate whether or not spending $1.2 billion is really, something we want to do. As far as, who it hurts, who it costs the recreational user, the naturalist, the conservationist. The recreational value of the river is unknown. I mean, it has so much potential. Just in my past, I've had people who have come to visit me, and I live in the Quad City area near the river, and a highlight for them is to go stick their feet in the Mississippi. It has that sort of grand, thought behind it, and I don't think that's a value we should lose.
Yeah, I grew up in Moline along the river and spent a fair amount of time both in Moline, Rock Island, along the river. It has that special quality to it. One of the points in the videotape related to the issue of barge traffic versus using the current rail system. It said basically that the rail system could accommodate the increased demand for grain exports. Yeah,
there was a study that was commissioned out of Iowa State University that shows rail is more efficient and a better energy use overall as opposed to navigation. It's a better sort of reliable transportation system over navigation.
So what are some of the ecological issues? We've got the recreational thing and just the grandeur of the Mississippi as it flows south. What are some of the ecological issues that people are concerned about here?
Probably the overlying issue is sedimentation. With kind of moving the river from being a large open area, we've kind of channelized it and made it a narrow, deeper river that has faster flow and things like that. So you're having, a larger problem with the river itself cutting away banks and adding to the erosion problem. Add that with, farming bank to, to the bank and things like that. All this is having an impact. And as you have flood events and things like that, where you normally would have had the river, create a new backwater area, instead you're having just the sediment left and filling in backwaters. And backwaters are where you really have your fish that spawn and are the habitat for migratory birds and things like that. And so we're seeing that being lost. And so, by doubling the amount of traffic on the river, you're going to double that problem with sedimentation.
And not good for fish and mussels and all the other things that live in the river, I would assume. One of the major proposal is going to lengthen the locks from 600 to 1,200 feet. There's some other proposals like increasing the length of the guide walls and maybe having tugboats come in and assist barges to go through, maybe more cost effective.
That's what the Corps' preliminary study showed, that expanding the locks, the additional 600 feet, was not going to show any benefit up to 2020. Whereas there was a limited increase in benefits by installing powered keels and things like that. But the initial core study showed that there was no economic benefits to expanding the system. So.
I'd like to make a plug for a periodical that I received that you might be interested in. It's called the Mississippi Monitor. Stick it up here. Maybe we could see the website for this. American Rivers, which is a national organization, puts this publication out. I've brought a couple issues here. It's a monthly publication that focuses on issues regarding Mississippi River. They actually have a Missouri Monitor as well, but it's free, it's monthly, and You can go to their website and find out how to get a copy of it, but I encourage you to do that. It's a terrific publication for anybody interested in staying up on this issue and other issues of river health in Iowa and in the region. So what's the next step here? The Corps is doing this study. When will we know more about this?
They release results periodically. We expect a new round of documents to be released pretty soon. In early spring, late summer, we expect to have another round of public hearings. And so we encourage people to attend those public hearings, talk to their congressional leaders, because ultimately Congress will make the decision.
Mm-hmm. So how are our congressional people, Jim Leach and others, Lane Evans?
A lot of them haven't, said too much
Mm-hmm.
about the issue
Mm-hmm.
yet. I think it's still,
Okay.
they're still waiting to get more of the data in from the Corps and things like that.
All right.
So
Jennifer, thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Sierra Club doing some good work on river issues, particularly the Mississippi, paying attention because some of us don't have time to, and we appreciate their work. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom, the host. I'd like to thank the crew for doing a great job tonight, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks for tuning in.